I want to take just a moment to introduce you to a conversation I had this week with two of my close friends. Pastor Brett Fuller is pastor of Grace Covenant Church in Chantilly, Virginia, outside of our nation's capital. And Pastor Seth Trimmer pastors Grace City Church in Corvallis, Oregon. These guys joined me for a conversation about the racial tensions that are very real in our country and even our community. It's been clear to me that I've had conversations with those that are in this community as a part of our church and outside of our church, as well as our nation, that the racial tensions that we exist in are real at this time. And we know that God has something to say about it. And so we want to take a moment to listen to one another and have a substantive conversation that might bring more light than heat. Much of the rhetoric today has a lot of heat and not a lot of enlightenment. And so we wanted to talk biblically about this, experientially about this, and you're going to hear some things in here that are pretty raw. You're going to hear some experiences and some questions that may make you feel uncomfortable. And my experience with these conversations is that typically is what happens. And sometimes we have to take those moments to have uncomfortable conversations that help us love one another well and help us represent Jesus well. So I would encourage you to take a moment, listen to this conversation all the way through, and let the Lord begin to work on your heart and highlight things that you might need to be thinking about and praying about as a follower of Jesus Christ, whether you're white or whether you're black. We're so grateful for these men to join us in this conversation. And before we get into it, I want to just share a scripture that has been on my heart. It's found in Philippians chapter 2. And throughout this season, it's been reverberating in me and coming to mind over and over again. It says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves." Think about that for a moment. Count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Paul, in writing to the church at Philippi, goes on to describe this is exactly what Jesus did when he came to be with us. Conversations are just that, they're conversations, and they need to be continued. There are no easy answers or quick fixes. There's likely not all of the answers in this conversation you're seeking. But my prayer and our hope is it'll be a biblical, solid conversation for you to start thinking rightly about this serious issue we face in our day. Thanks.
Well, I want to welcome everybody. We are so glad to have two of some of my favorite people with me today. I am grateful to have Pastor Brett Fuller and Seth Trimmer with us. Pastor Seth Trimmer from Corvallis, Oregon. He pastors Grace City Church in the big city of Corvallis in the beautiful state of Oregon. Pastor Seth and I have been friends for a long time. He actually played football as wide receiver for Oregon State University. He is on the front end of helping get our seminary going on with some guys like William Merle and Adam Mabry and some of the other guys leaning into Every Nation Seminary, which is amazing. And matter of fact, he's really fast. I don't know if you know this, Pastor Brett, but I have challenged Seth Trimmer to a race, like a foot race at one point. We were in Orlando, Florida. I challenged him to a race. This is a true story. And I was actually on a moving sidewalk when I challenged him. And he still beat me. And I was on a moving sidewalk. So I just want to say, I don't know if that speaks to his speed still as a 40-year-old man, but it definitely speaks to my slowness. So Seth, he's been to mid-cities before. He's been around Every Nation, traveling, speaking, preaching, and serving in many ways. But Seth loves Jesus and has a lot of wisdom when it comes to the Bible and culture. And so I'm grateful that, Seth, that you're here with us.
Happy to be one of your favorite people. That's awesome.
Pastor Brett Fuller really needs no introduction, but I'm going to try anyway because he's the president of the board of Every Nation Churches. He is a father, a husband. He pastors a interracial, multi-ethnic megachurch in Chantilly, Virginia. called Grace Covenant Church. He loves Jesus. He's the chaplain for the Redskins, the NFL team there in our nation's capital. And he is no stranger to dealing with the Bible and difficult situations with race, engaged in his community. He's been involved with community development and engaging law enforcement and his community in Chantilly in such a significant way. And I know no one that honors God like Brett Fuller. I don't know anyone like you, Brett, that loves Jesus the way you do. You're one of the best Christians I know. And I'm not, this is not flattery. This is true. Those of you that don't know Brett Fuller, it is an honor to call him friend. And I know because I know he's a friend of God. So thank you, Pastor Brett, for joining us for this.
Glad to be a part. I appreciate the invite. And I just want to say from the outset, I'm sorry that you've only got a couple of NFL teams there that you can support. Namely that one Dallas. Choose Houston. Houston's much nicer. It's a better place.
The Cowboys. Listen, the Cowboys and the Redskins. This is a country that goes away. We both have our woes, though.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, neither one of us have been very good.
Well, obviously, we're here today because of what's happening in our nation, and there has been a nation. Our nation really has been gripped by the unjust deaths of multiple unarmed Black men and women like Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd most recently. And as a result, of course, there's been protests throughout the nation. Anyone that's been watching their news or their news feed has seen what's been going on in the response of that. Some of those protests have broken into riots. Many of them are very peaceful. But it seems like on the heels of COVID-19, on the heels of economic collapse for much of the nation and even the globe, here we are navigating racial tensions to the scale that we haven't really seen, or I have not seen in my lifetime for sure. And I think having a conversation, which is what we wanted to do here, about what is our biblical response as Christians, as followers of Jesus? How are we to engage and not engage in all that's going on as we watch our news feeds? And so these guys are going to kind of help us figure that out. And I'm so grateful, Pastor Brett, that you're going to just bring some perspective from your years of experience. And I want to ask you this first question, and we're just going to, after I ask this question, we're just going to have a conversation, the three of us. And so feel free to lean in and share whatever you have. But I want to just ask, Pastor Brett is an African-American pastor who leads a mega church near our nation's capital in a city that's largely divided most days for partisan reasons, and someone who's worked with the chief of police in your community and engaged in deep conversations on some of these issues, and who's helped navigate an NFL team through thorny issues at times. Is there a problem with race in our country? Just first, is there a problem with racism in America?
Well, it's a rhetorical question, obviously. Yes, but I think most of America is just now coming to the understanding of how deep the problem is, how prevalent it is. When we elect an African-American as president, and when you see CEOs that are African-American of Fortune 500 companies, when you are rubbing shoulders with a Black woman who's next to you in your cubicle and has what you believe the greatest opportunity, at least what you have, to be upwardly mobile. When Black folks are living in predominantly white neighborhoods and their children are going to those schools, it feels equal. But it's only détente. Détente is just the cessation of conflict. It is not peace. And peace is that which comes from deep understanding and the manifestation of people coming to the conclusion, usually the offender coming to the conclusion of, oh, that's what I did to hurt you. And the offended saying, Yeah, you did. And I'm willing to forgive. And peace, reconciliation begins to happen. And what we're seeing is just under the surface, the dissatisfaction, the disenfranchisement, the lack of respect, lack of dignity, the opposing feelings that some people have, even though the laws have changed, that the dominant population has toward the African American community. And I wouldn't say that most people feel that way, but there are enough who can represent the white community that it makes it feel like, because the white community has not been as responsive as they are now, that that's the way the white community feels. There's no outrage. When something happens to an African American in a law enforcement situation that was abusive, somebody gets murdered, somebody's treated really poorly, the black folks are generally the only ones that are outraged. Yes, that's what it has been. We haven't seen many white people en masse say that was wrong, it needs to be adjusted. This is the first time we've seen it, whereby white people are coming out and demonstrating and saying this has to stop. Now, it happened in the civil rights movement. There was a large contingency of clergy that participated with Martin Luther King and others who were white, even Jewish. But you didn't see the populace. You didn't see the rank and file, the garden variety American. And now you see that. And for the most part, most of the rallies, most of the protests are dominated by people who aren't Black. That's the predominant look of the rally. And you sit there and say, wow, that's neat. But how did we get here?
Yeah.
We get here because people saw something that outraged them. Now, I'm not quite sure why this outraged them any more than Eric Garner did 4 or 5 years ago. He was choked out, not by a knee, but by arms. It was just as insulting and horrible to watch. But the white community didn't en masse cry foul. Black community did. And we can list all the others who were disproportionately, poorly treated, whether either by abuse or by death from white officers. And you have to say, gosh, there have been so many other opportunities where you could have said something and you didn't. And so we feel like for the longest, people didn't care about us. They just didn't care. How much we said, foul, wrong, help us, please. Nobody was listening. Nobody was listening. So when people won't listen, folks resort to other means to try to get truth down into them. You get on the streets, you start yelling. You break open stores. Is there any excuse for violence? No. Any excuse for looting? Never, never, never. But I'm not talking about people who are restrained by the Holy Spirit. I'm talking about people who are mad.
Sure.
And when people are really, really mad as a result of a pain that is justified, pain rarely uses the most polite doors to exit. It takes its release as best as it knows how, unrestrained usually. We love somebody's pain to be articulated in such a way that it makes sense to people. Oh, that's what hurt you? Let's dialogue about it. Wouldn't that be nice? Doesn't happen that way, usually. It comes out in ways that are sometimes unproductive, in many ways hurtful. And that's what the Black community has done in the last 2 weeks. Now, for the last 7 days or so, many of the protests have been very, very peaceful.
Right.
And the police have had a different response as well. Law enforcement, some of them have actually, I wouldn't say joined in the protest, but participated in saying, I understand, I get it, let me kneel with you. And that's huge. I mean, it's just, when white people, even though they don't understand, when they say they do, most Black people say, I know you don't, but thank you for trying. They acknowledge the effort. And so all I've done in the last 5 is to give you understanding as to why the African-American experience seems to be a little bit different than the white experience. And if I were to give you a little history lesson, you can understand why we got here, namely that the Constitution was not written for us. It wasn't written for us. We were not even an afterthought. We were disregarded, meaning that we were considered 3/5 of a person in the Constitution. That's what slaves were. Not even human beings, property. Now, those are my ancestors. Those are my relatives that this nation did not think were human enough to be considered as people, property. 1857, there was a decision by Dred Scott. It's called the Dred Scott decision in our jurisprudence system. A man took the United States to court saying, we have to be considered citizens because there are a lot of freed slaves out there. And we have no status in the country. And the Supreme Court said, Dred Scott, you are not a citizen, and neither are any descendants of slaves considered citizens in America.
Wow.
Civil War happened in 1860s. By 1863, sentiment had grown. Lincoln produced the Emancipation Proclamation. That was great. Civil War was over in 1865. And through 1865 and 1866, we had 3 amendments to the Constitution. We had the 13th, 14th, and 15th. The 13th freed all African Americans who were slaves. Yay. The 14th said, you are now citizens. Yay. The 15th said, you can now vote. That we actually had to have amendments to our Constitution that quantified and verbally articulated our dignity says a lot about how America thinks about us. And then when all those things of citizenship and voting came up, the South decided we're going to create laws that keep them distant anyway. Right. So you had Jim Crow laws, whereby you had black bathrooms and white bathrooms, and you had black schools and white schools. You had white communities, you had black communities. And the black community began to say, wait a minute now, I thought we were all Americans. And so, again, went to the courts, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1897. They said, we need to integrate. Plessy versus Ferguson, we lost again. They said, no, we need separate but equal. That's what the court said, separate but equal. Problem was, it was separate but never equal, unequal. And so resources from the federal government flowed down to white folks' community, but not to blacks. So we were kept as a permanent underclass, a second class, if you will. In 1921, there was a horrible event that happened in Greenwood, Oklahoma, a suburb of Tulsa, whereby it was known as the Black Wall Street. It was one of the most prosperous communities of African-American population in the country. And it was a freedman's town. Freedman's town was a place where freed slaves could go and establish themselves. And it was said that an African-American had been relating to a white female in Tulsa. The response from the people of Tulsa was to get the fire department, the police department, the civil authorities, and a mob, and burn down the city and kill 300 folks, massacre them, and maim more. And not only was nobody ever convicted, nobody was ever charged. Ever charged. America didn't care about us. We were trashed to them. Went to the insurance companies to try to get our houses rebuilt in Greenwood. Our business rebuilt. The insurance company said, "I'm sorry, it was a riot, not covered." I'm just giving you a thumbnail sketch, scratch and sniff. From 1932 to 1972, there was an experiment in Tuskegee, Alabama, on men who had a disease, and men that they were going to be treated and monitored so that we would know how the disease went as a result of treatment. And they gave them medicine, but it was really a placebo. And for 50 years, they treated these African-American men in Tuskegee like guinea pigs and let them suffer and die when they told them they were giving them things that would heal them. For 50 years, just let them die. And that was sanctioned by whatever version of the CDC there was back then.
Yeah. That
was America. Now, I can tell you my own horror stories, and any African-American who is my age or below can give you theirs. Or in other words, born before me, my age and above can give you theirs. America has not treated us well. It just has not. Having said that, I love my country. Love it. I'll die for it. My father came back from the military, having served faithfully. Community didn't care. The Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen who flew as fighter pilots to protect the bombers in World War II, didn't lose one bomber. Wow. The only, I don't know what you call it, a brigade, only fighting pilot, guardian, escort troop in the entire World War II that could say that. Those men came back to disrespect. It took 40 years for this country to recognize their accomplishments and give them medals. Many of them had passed by then. History has not been kind to us. So may I say, I'm not complaining.
Sure.
Healed. I'm about as whole as you can get when it comes to understanding what it looks like to have Jesus come down and fix me. But I still carry the sociological inequity, and it needs to be addressed at some level. Now, most people just want to address it on the basis of truth. And truth is this, and justice needs to be satisfied. I get it. I'm not trying to get around justice. Justice for a person that was inappropriately treated by law enforcement, or justice for people that have been inappropriately treated for 400 years. I don't know what it all looks like. I know what the law enforcement thing looks like. I know somebody needs to go to jail minimally. Somebody needs to go to jail minimally. I don't know what the other thing looks like. We need to dialogue about that. But I don't want to stop at justice. Justice needs to be meted out. But the gospel goes all the way to reconciliation. Justice finishes stuff. It doesn't fix anything. It finishes the process of making sure that the person who did a wrong deed gets its consequences. But anybody who has experienced justice for wrongdoer, and they have been the victim, you talk to them and say, did it heal you? No. And so my goal is to get to the place of healing. And that's where the gospel comes in.
Yeah. That's
where God makes friends out of enemies. He takes the hurting and heals them. He takes the offender and makes them a contrite, repentant human being to the offended. And God does something in terms of wholeness. And where do I get this from? The way God got me. I was an offender. Chased me down. And gave me reconciliation when I did not deserve it. So I feel it's not just a part of, it's not just a thing I think would help. It's not just a remedy that I want to employ because I think it happens to be the best one out there. It's not just a prescription. It's a calling that if I've received reconciliation, 2 Corinthians 5, I need to give it. And so in this area, I have made my ministry a major foundation pillar. And I'm sorry, I'm talking so long.
You're fine. No,
I've made a major foundation pillar of my ministry, reconciliation. And that's why my staff is so diverse. That's why my church is so diverse. But that diversity is not just window dressing. It's not just reflective. It's effective.
Yeah.
So in these days, I kept telling my church, I said, guys, keep building like this because there's going to come a day. Things aren't healthy in our society. We just don't know it yet. I know it. White folk don't know it yet. There's going to come a day where white folk realize, oh, this is how sick we are. I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Keep living this way because somebody's going to come knocking on our door saying, you can help, can't you? You do this regularly? And my phone has not stopped ringing. And I can't tell you my entire staff They are deployed in community service, helping HOAs and businesses and schools and organizations like football teams figure out what does it look like to have diversity that makes sense, that is not just reflective. I'm not looking for window dressing. I don't want you to use me as a token or IU. I want it to be effective. Does it make a difference that we're together? Yeah. The grace of God in our every nation world that now makes a difference. Not just in preaching the gospel to see college kids saved, next generation one, families restored, kids brought back to God, the communities. We're seeing that what we're doing in this conversation and dialogue is actually making a difference. So I'm done with my introduction.
No, that's so great. I appreciate your thought. And the history, I think, is incredibly helpful. And Seth, I want to bring you in too on this, like just like the thought of historically. I mean, I've been reading a biography on Grant, Ulysses S. Grant. It's about 1,000 pages. I think Caleb, my wife, has read like 7 books by the time I'm trying to finish this one. But it recounts some of the history that you're describing during the Civil War and Reconstruction. And one of the things that struck me with that is I was reading in there, it talked about, I think, Douglas MacArthur, the great World War II general, right? Said his dad fought in the Civil War. So I started doing the math and going, that wasn't that long. Like, I know we like to think that was a long time ago. Like that was back in Adam and Eve's time. But honestly, man, it was not that long ago that the South there, you had over 2 million freed slaves in a moment in the South. And then you had promises from Lincoln and from Grant. And then, of course, a week after Lee surrenders at Appomattox, you have just 1 week later, you have Lincoln getting shot and Andrew Johnson becoming the president. I mean, what a turn our nation took from Lincoln to Andrew Johnson in that moment, who was sensitive, of course, to the South and pro-Southern white, one of the most racist presidents we've ever had. And the Reconstruction just started getting halted even in that moment. And we're talking 150 years. But of course, all of this is, as believers, we believe there's sin involved in this. So Seth, I'd love you to speak into like the idea of the sin, the sin that sometimes even can get codified. And when sinners come together, we can codify sin into law. And what does the believer need to know about that? Or just what are some of your thoughts on the biblical perspective of our history in light of sin?
Yeah. Well, just first off, Pastor Brett, I mean, that was just incredibly amazing to hear from you. And to speak to Christians, I think I'll just speak to white Christians if that's okay. I think that's kind of why I'm here. I think of your token white guy for this conversation. So here's one of the things that's really been helpful for me biblically is that typically when evangelical pastors preach about sin, we use Genesis chapter 3. And we use that as the fall of humanity, which it is. However, from the biblical viewpoint, when you read Genesis and all of its context, and if you were to ask like an ancient Hebrew, for example, like, well, what's wrong with the world? Like where was the fall of man? They would tell you not just Genesis 3, they would tell you Genesis 3, Genesis 6, and Genesis 11. And so I think there is a tendency, especially in modern Western American white, middle and upper middle class America, to think so individualistically. And Genesis 3 really is more of a narrative of individual sin. Genesis 6 starts to introduce the category of a demonic infusion into our world. And there's an unseen realm that has its toll and influence into what's going on beyond just human evil. There's unseen evil that is also in the mix. And then Genesis 11 culminates in the story of Babylon. And that's the story where human individual sin has accumulated and gotten into the bloodstream, of the culture and the environment, so much so that Babylon is the representation of collective human sin. And what we have to understand is that like this is as much of a big deal as Genesis 3 is. And putting the world back right, which is Jesus's mission on the cross, is more than just the reconciliation of individuals. And so I think where I hear a lot of times my white congregation or members of my white congregation struggle is if you were to think of Babylon, for example, this was the epitome of kind of evil being established, giving a giant middle finger to God through the construction of the tower they're building. But where do you lay blame, right? What about the dudes that's just laying bricks? You know what I mean? Do you say like, dude, you're wrong for laying bricks? He's like, dude, I'm just feeding my family. Like, I didn't choose to build this tower. Someone else above me chose to build this tower. I'm just laying bricks. Or what about someone that's not even laying bricks? What if someone's just got a food truck, you know, to feed the people making bricks, you know? What if it's the farmers that are providing the food for the food trucks that's feeding the people making bricks? And so where do you draw the line, right? Of who's guilty for Babylon, right? Is it just the king? Is it just kind of his immediate court? Is it the managers of the construction? Or is it the people doing the construction, supporters of it? So you just realize that you can't draw any clean lines. It's probably fair to say there's disproportionate amount of accountability across those lines, but there's nowhere where you can say that the stain of their rebellion and their evil hasn't just infected everyone. And that's where I think a lot of Westerners just throw up their hands well, I'm not going to be held accountable for some cultural issue. Tell me what I've done. I'll fix that. And then I'm good. And I think that is probably just where our biblical theology has fallen short, because we've done maybe a really good job with Genesis 3 and really ignored, Pentecostals pull in the Genesis 6 motif a bit more, but really ignored the Genesis 11 motif. And it's allowed us to be blind to the history that Pastor Brett just laid out, or to discount it. Maybe not be blind to it. I think there's a lot of people that are aware of the history, at least generally, but we discount it. And we think, well, what does that have to do with us today? What does that have to do with me? And the answer is that this world is just far more interconnected than we realize. And God can call nations to repentance, which means that there has to be a category of the individual and the collective that both matter to God somehow. And just using an individualistic argument against a collectivist accusation is just missing the mark, right? It's just talking past each other. And so we have to reconcile both. And my personal individual guilt is not the same as my cultural guilt. So those are two different things as well. So even the way that looks like in response, and even the way I emotionally process that through is different. So I think we do well. The biblical story helps us. It gives us categories for these things that if we could pay attention to them holistically, it's going to be messy, but at least offers us a pathway towards holistic repentance, justice, which is the restoration of righteousness, which is essential, because we're all about reconciliation. But as Pastor Brett mentioned, that can be oftentimes a very superficial, conflict-averse harmony. But yeah, no justice and restoration and restitution, all of these things are part of actually the biblical narrative of what reconciliation looks like.
So how does that practically, let me ask you this, Seth, Pastor Brett or Seth, whoever wants a chance at this, let's make this super practical. I'm a white guy who has not owned slaves, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't know, maybe my parents weren't slaves. They were maybe Underground Railroad, people that helped with Underground Railroad. I don't know, but I didn't own slaves. I don't feel, should I feel responsible for this? And then should I feel guilty for being white? Do white guys need to feel guilty for being white guys? How do you respond to that? And then what do you do with that guilt? So there's there's sin that's individual, and then there's sin that's collective or societal in that way. How do you atone for that? How do you deal with that? How do you process that in a practical way? Either one of you guys that wants to.
Well, let me do this. I'm going to let Seth speak to the responsibility that white people might have to sins that other white people did that they did not. And I'm just going to give an example. It is not a perfect overlay, but it does bring up principles from Scripture that allow us to at least ponder what what possible responsibility do I have when I didn't do anything, but my predecessors did?
Good.
So we've got an account in 2 Samuel 21. David is king. And there is no more righteous king than David. We think that this probably happened before he was with Bathsheba, this account. 2 Samuel 21, 22, 23 are pretty much kind of historical narratives that summarize some of the highlights of David's reign and some of the lowlights. So it's not chronological from the point of 2 Samuel 1 to 2 Samuel 21 and then 22, 21, 2 Samuel 1 to 20, 21, 22, and 23 are a little bit different. So we think this happened before he messed up with Bathsheba. There was a famine in the land. And he couldn't figure out why, because he was serving God well. He had no idea. A famine for 3 years. 3 years. He calls his prophet, one of his prophets, Gad. He says, what in the heck's going on here? Gad seeks God. And Gad says, the Lord said it's because of the sin that your predecessor Saul committed against the Gibeonites. Now, the Gibeonites were a people who had committed a degree of treachery in their presentation of who they were in Joshua's day. Joshua had the people come into the promised land. He was the first governor in the land, first judge. And he met these people. They had put on dirty clothes and tattered clothes and had dry, moldy bread, if you will, and appeared to be from a long way away. And they had heard about how the Israelites, God was really special and that he was going to vanquish all the people in the land. Well, actually, they were from the land, but they appeared to not be from the land. And they told Joshua they weren't from the land. Their story was this: we're from a long way away, but we know about your God. What we're hoping is that you won't ever go to war with us. Can you promise us that? Joshua goes to his elders. They say, yep, let's go ahead and make it happen. They don't seek God. As a result, they make a covenant with these people, and it turns out they're right around the corner. They live around the corner. And Joshua made a mistake. They should have been vanquished, but now they were put to servitude forever. The Gibeonites were supposed to be servants of the people of Israel forever. Covenant was made. And this is where it breaks down a little, in that there is no superimposition between whatever covenant was made with the Gibeonites and the Israelites, from white people to black people. No covenant. But we do see this, that Saul, when he became king, decided, there are some people living in my land that aren't us. He didn't read his Old Testament. We need to vanquish them. I'm gonna be the sword of God. And he went to war against them and massacred them. Now, this wasn't behind closed doors. Anytime the military goes to war, everybody knows. Everybody knows.
Sure.
So that was wrong. David comes to power, and Gad said, Saul blew it. And the point I'm trying to make is this: difficulty came in David's generation as a result of his predecessor's sin and it not being dealt with well. It cannot be superimposed as somehow the white folks had a covenant with the black folks and they broke it. That's not the issue. The issue is that for some reason, God allowed for a second generation, another generation, to be affected by a previous generation's mistake, which helps us understand that although I may not have done anything wrong, I mean, David could cry out every day and say, it wasn't me. Why are you making us suffer, God, for 3 years in a famine? It wasn't me. It's not my fault. Yeah, you were part of the people, though.
Yeah.
You were part of the people. And so your predecessor didn't fix it. I want you to. Now, to continue with the story, I want to stop because the solution was horrible. Absolutely horrible. And I don't advise that at all. I'm just letting you know this one fact, that a second generation or a third or a fourth can still be held responsible for something that happened prior that wasn't fixed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Anything you'd add to that, Seth?
Some generations are bigger than or some problems are bigger than a generation. We just have such a microwave individualistic temperament, and it's only increasing, in the last 10, 15 years. We think if it hasn't happened in the last 9 months, it really is irrelevant. It doesn't matter, to our world. And I think what we're seeing is probably in the light of grander human history, a radical speed of light move of social change. I mean, if you want to think 150 years, or like that's a blip, And so I think part of it is owning your moment, owning your generation, and being aware of the shoulders you stand on, or being aware of what has been handed to you, and doing your part. I think that the fact that this moment feels so difficult and challenging. I've heard one person say, like, yeah, like all the easy problems have been solved already. So that's why they're all hard. And I think there's something to that. So I think there's just a humility to come to this moment and realize I think that's the invitation. We have an opportunity to play in our generation that it wasn't easy in our parents and grandparents and their grandparents' generation. It wasn't the stuff they had to navigate. You imagine going through a civil war with hundreds of thousands of deaths, brothers killing brothers, and then assassination of a president, and then the complete reversal, of sentiment. Like, it has been worse. So
It's been worse. Indeed, it has.
And I could read the Bible and see that it's been worse in some ways too. So I think in some ways there's encouragement and there's hope in our generation. I think of what would it look like to take ownership of that? Well, I think that I think God has given us this beautiful gift in our country of diversity, even though it's come through much bloodshed and pain. I think we are better, and I don't believe it in the very liberal secular sense of diversity. I believe it in the terms of the kingdom of God, and that it fully expresses His image and His beauty somehow. Right. That unity is not uniformity. Good. And there's something that is deep in the heart of God that desires that. And so I believe that our country has a unique opportunity in that. And so I think that what that looks like then is a lot of listening, a lot of humility to not be ignorant of our history and where we come from, to realize that our past affects our present. I think it looks like, especially in a lot of white homes, like making sure conversations with our kids are being had. And I think it also means just dealing not just with Black history or the Black experience, but, as a white person who lives in a very white town with a very, very small Black population, why is that? There's actually there's reasons for why, these demographics are the way that they are. There's a history there. And I think you have to consider what about my disposition? What do I bring to my community that is maybe part of that disposition? That's part of that legacy and history. Do I genuinely know, not as a token, but genuinely know any Black people in my life? How much time do I spend listening to them versus just, listening to what people say about them in the news cycle? I think all those things really, really do matter. Pastor Brad, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
I'm grateful for anybody who's trying to figure out how in the world to be me. I'm grateful. Identification, it's important to our unity. Yeah. But don't do it alone. Don't sit there and read an article and think, oh, that's terrible. I really feel sorry for them. I'm not waking up fearful every day. I don't wake up in trepidation wondering what's going to happen to me when I go to the mall, or if a police officer is going to stop me and not be nice to me. I go through life wearing my color as a badge. I'm proud of my heritage. I don't live in fear. I don't live in trepidation. I don't tell my kids to live that way. I do help them to be guarded. I say, if you get stopped, listen to me. Listen to me. I do not care how dignified you feel at that moment and how much you feel like you need to exercise your civil rights as a citizen. You come home. So, 10 and 2, and you say, yes, sir. If he tells you to get out of the car and get on the hood, yes, sir. Put your hands behind your back, yes, sir. Take the license plate because he won't give you your badge. If you ask him for your badge, he's going to treat you real bad. Take the license plate down. You come home, and I'll deal with it when we get home. And you bring your dignity with you. He might try to take it, but you got it. Because you have authority, but he's got all power. You listen, I want you home. We'll fight it when when we get home. Now, I got to have those conversations and many more with my children, while at the same time, not allowing them to feel a drop of fear when they walk out of my house. That God is with them every moment of the day. He loves them. He's protecting them. He's helping them. And they are African Americans, strong in their heritage. So many others have been through worse, that have built on you, on the inside of you, the DNA that can handle even worse. So live that way with your head high. My point is, come in my world, step across my threshold, get to know me, sit down with me, be in my house, invite me to yours. That's the way we begin to understand who each other are, and don't just base our relationship on the huge offense of the elephant in the room. We can actually do other stuff like play Monopoly. Ha! Think about that. We might even go to King's Dominion or Universal Studios together and have a good time. Yes, we Black people do that. It doesn't have to be centered just around this. It could be normal life. And as you see what normal looks like for me, we develop a new normal. And you learn what stupid stuff you shouldn't say and good stuff you should.
Yeah. Pastor Brett, is there a what's the, as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus Christ, which is our primary identity, right? How do you balance this idea of you are a follower of Jesus Christ, and we're reminded in Scripture our citizenship is in heaven, and that we are, Ephesians reminds us the two have become one flesh, speaking of Jew and Greek, a Jew and Gentile coming together, and as Paul describes that in Ephesians. How do you balance who you are as a believer and who you are as an African American man, if that makes sense? And what there's people that say, well, are you identifying? Shouldn't you be a Christian first and an African American man second, or I'm a Christian first, a white man second or third, or whatever the case may be? What's your thought towards that?
Yeah, it's a great thought. Was Jesus God first or man first when he was on the planet? That's a theological question.
Great question, yeah.
I know what he was before he became human. That's not an issue. But when he came here, what was he? Which one first? I am a Christian, and I choose to identify with being defined by my God. But I don't know how in the world to be defined by him except to be fully defined by him. So I'm a believer, and I submit all that I am to the Word of God every day of my life. But I can't separate my experience. I can't devoid myself of everything through which I've been and still be real. I've got to allow the incarnation of God in me to be as genuine as it was for any other believer. And so I can't dismiss my pain. I can't dismiss all the things through which I've gone simply to wear the moniker of Christian. I've got to incorporate them and bring my theology of redemption into my pain and allow him to heal me so I can be a testimony of who he has made Brett to be, not just of who he's made a Christian to be. And so my African American heritage is a part of the fabric of my life, and I love it. I don't want to separate it. If push were to come to shove about which I identify with more, I have to say it's the fact that Jesus Christ died for me, and I want to be his ambassador more than I want to be an ambassador for my own ethnic gain. And everybody ought to feel that. But I'm never going to separate my ethnic responsibility, my privilege of being African American, and the history that I carry with me from my ancestors, and that through which I've been. I don't want to separate that from being me to everybody else. So I've got to be both, and proudly so. The danger I think all of us have, Black, white, Asian, Latino, is that we put our flesh in front of our theology, in front of our new creation reality. And whenever our carnality leads, it's never a win for anybody. It's not a win for humanity, and it's not a win for the kingdom. Nobody wins when we move out of the flesh, when anger, bitterness, selfish, malice, adultery, idolatry, lust, when those things manifest before our renewed nature, everybody loses.
Yeah.
But when we lead by the Spirit, I don't think we have to separate who we are from how we present.
Right.
If we allow the transforming work of Christ to be that which changes us from the inside. And I'm going to stop with this. Y'all don't know me. I realize I'm new to your world. But the version you see of me has been made by Jesus. I imagine there may be some presenters of this version of truth, of ethnic inclusion and diversity and multi-ethnic reconciliation. I imagine that there are presenters that are better than me. But you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody who's been through what I've been through and are more healed with respect to white folks. Hard pressed. When I was growing up, we lived in a white world. Our house was egged. Our cars were destroyed. Came out one morning, mom was taking us to school. Beautiful 64 Mustang. If any of y'all know what that is, that's a car.
Arguably the car.
The car, just about the car. And in all America, you look in the icons of automotive history. That one there, rag top, cherry orange. Beautiful car. Was my mama's. Came out one morning, destroyed. Tires slashed, sledgehammer taken to the roof, roof pulled off, chairs pulled out, just because we were black in the neighborhood. They burned crosses in our neighborhood. Wow. I was called everything but my first name in my school. We broke the color barrier in our neighborhood. We weren't allowed to swim in the swimming pool. So my daddy, the next week, called the swimming company. Bulldozer was in my backyard. He's going to have a place for his kids to swim. I know what it's like to be treated poorly. And I have the marks of racism, much like Paul said, I bear the marks of Christ in my body. I bear those. Yeah. But I bear the marks of racism as well. The difference between me and a lot of my brothers and sisters is that I don't smell like the smoke through which that manifests the fire through which I went.
Yeah.
I manifest a different aroma. I manifest a sweet aroma of the knowledge of him in every place. Why? Because I've allowed my humanity to be submitted to my theology, my understanding of what Jesus did for me at the cross. But you understand this, that we're now 45 minutes into this discussion. And you've learned a whole lot about my African-American understanding, from my perspective, my African-American understanding of what America needs to do to fix what's wrong. I don't compromise the truth I know needs to be addressed. The facts will not lie down. Yeah. But I come at it from a very healed perspective. So, long way around to the front door of answering your question, Pastor Daniel. I don't separate the two. I just distinguish them.
How would you guys... No, go ahead.
I was going to say, Daniel, that I think Pastor Brett, I think one of the things that's so powerful about your life that for sure I deeply respect you for is that, the way that who you are, your experiences, your heritage, and all the pain you've had to wade through, and all the ways you've had to press into Jesus to even just make it out emotionally of that entanglement, in any relational sense. You've leveraged that for the sake of the kingdom, that it's clear that you're holding the tension of, it would be easy to not care about white people, in terms of your church and ministry. You and I, we've talked before, and I'm not even a Christian without two amazing Black men that preached the gospel to me and discipled me. That's how it happened. And I'll be honest, I believe in the sovereignty of God, and so I believe that Jesus could have saved me however he wanted to save me, but I can't discount the fact of my shock and awe that for the first time in my life, two Black men genuinely cared about me and my soul. And in my head, I'm like, you have every reason to just completely ignore me and want nothing to do with me and to not include me, as a brother, in this thing you're doing. And I began to know them well enough to know they probably had plenty of excuses to, pass me by, but didn't. And they extended the gospel to me. So I think that, when Paul says, like, I have become all things to all men, that by all means I might save some, like Paul never stopped being Hebrew, but he was willing to leverage however God had made him, whatever he had gone through in his life, just to figure out a way to bring more people into the kingdom. To me, that just speaks of the heart and love of Jesus, and I think it's the convenience of the white experience that can so readily pretend we've dissociated our cultural background and heritage for just a pure Christianity. And there's just no such thing. There's no such thing as a culturally pure Christian, a citizen of heaven, because the vision of Revelation is of all the nations gathered with their cultural uniqueness still intact. The junk has been eradicated and the good stuff has been redeemed. So, but I think we just have that image of this pure, spotless sort of a Christian person. And in some ways, we've just confused that with white Christian or European Christian. And that's just worthy of pondering and considering, and so that we just call it what it is and learn to appreciate the best of parts of those things. And then together in community, we're going to be able to see the negative parts of those things too, and hopefully help each other walk through it.
Beautiful.
That's interesting. I think that's so true. And I wonder, in your all's opinion, what is the biggest biblical challenge? What is the biggest challenge that Christians face, whether they're black or white? What is the biggest challenge they face to take that next biblical step to reconciliation? Like, what is that? What's the biggest challenge for the black believer that's listening to this, watching this, and they're going, I want to be right with God. I want to be right with my brothers, but man, I got all these things going on in me, these emotions, these feelings. Maybe the white believers watching this as well and thinking similar things. There's just the questions are going off in their mind. How do I engage? What's the biggest challenge to taking that next biblical step? And what is that step, you think, for the black believer, for the white believer?
Well, I'll speak to the black believer. The way you phrased the question, most black believers would answer like this: if they're under your pastoral care, they're going to be nicer. If they're not, they're going to answer like this: for what do I need to repent? What do you mean, me get right with them?
Yeah,
that's what they're going to say. So just FYI.
Yep, I'm aware.
They're going to think white folk need to apologize to me.
Sure.
I don't need to do anything. They need to step correct. So let me say to all the black brothers out there, I get it. I really do. And you have every right to stand where you are as a human being, but I don't know how much right you have as a Christian. I don't know. And even if you had a right as a Christian to stand your ground and wait for everybody to come to you, how's that working for you? How many people are knocking on your door saying, I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. I want to apologize, but I don't even know what to say. How many people are using your stoop as a place where they decide to just camp out until they can get right with you? It's not going to happen. People are scared. I mean, we are now the proverbial black and proverbial black man, black woman, angry people, and they're scared. They don't know exactly what to say to us. Mm-hmm. And then because we won't be intreatable, we won't start the conversation. We stay apart. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I think we're going to have to be bigger than this and be like Jesus and chase people down. Hey, white person, can we have lunch? You want to learn? Come have lunch. It may not be the most digestible meal you ever have, but it will be helpful. And we need to be the ones, even though the most offended, be like God and pursue by being agents of reconciliation to those who want to learn. So I know it's hard. I know it's hard. I've lived it for 40 years. More than that. That's ministry. Before that, I lived it in my community before I was ever called. I know what it's like. And God has given me the privilege of making my enemies friends.
That's great.
You know, Daniel, I think that, yeah, if there were easy problems, I'd give you an easy answer. But I get really firmly convinced that church is plan A and there isn't a plan B. And when I hear, it just reinforces for me, I've been in the game 20 years now, but when I hear Pastor Brett say, yeah, I've been in this 40 years of dying to self, carrying his cross, speaking truth in love, being offended, probably offending, like, and reconciling, forgiving, apologizing, nonstop for 40 years. To be at a place now where all of a sudden the culture is like, oh, you know, and now they're knocking down his door. Like, we're not looking at a 1 week problem, and we're not looking at a 1 week solution. And it's like the same thing, like a marriage comes in for counseling and they're like, you know, I'm not going to fix you in our hour session. This was a 10-year problem you built, you know, give me more than 60 minutes, you know, and I just think that's what's going on in our country right now. You know, like every marriage has that moment where they have like that blow up fight where they're fighting about like, you know, you forgot to take the trash out last night, but they're not fighting about taking the trash out last night. They're fighting about 15 years of animosity, you know, and held back conflict. I think that's what our country is in right now. So I think that I think we're really, in terms of white Christianity, going to have to consider, what is our lifestyle? What is the long game going to look like? What is not just a 1 or 2 conversation or attendance at a few rallies, but what about a year or 2 years from now? Like, what are we going to create the kind of church that is actually going to be welcoming of people from different places to the place where they're not just going to be tokens, but heard? Are we going to be like Jesus and have a disproportional heart? He left the 99 to go after the one. So, crying out loud. For crying out loud. So if you want to do this, you're going to have to be disproportionately bent to do this. And you're going to have to care. You can't just go about your normal routine. You're going to have to literally make a choice right now in this moment to allow it to be disrupted, to be embarrassed, to be, to learn. And you're going to have to walk it out and prepare for a decade or two. Yeah. Prepare to lose some friendships and gain others. So I think this quick fix mentality is as much part of the problem as anything. And I think that's Pastor Brett, I'm sure you can feel this, but even the dissolution with the political process, like a quick policy, like, no, I think the church at the long game, if we had received our calling and walk this out faithfully in our generation, hand our kids something so they can fight their battles in theirs. Like, I think we can get somewhere. But it's going to take a different approach and mindset for the long haul. And it involves everything I just mentioned. So, beautiful. Yeah, I'm getting really frustrated getting quick solutions to big problems. Yeah, I don't think that's what God does.
And Pastor Daniel, if I could say one thing that would be helpful, I'm not trying to prescribe how white people need to approach me. I can't. There's no way I can relationally be in everybody's world and say this would be the best approach to that Black person. But I can give you a demeanor that would be helpful. Number one, try to be as clear as possible with your words. So rather than saying things like, I understand your pain.
No, you don't.
You don't. You don't.
That's actually therapy rule 101. Like, you don't do that. That's discipleship 101. No. You're not them. You don't know.
You don't know. But what you can say is this: I feel it. I feel pain. I don't understand it all. But I want to get close enough to be of help. I want to know where you live. Secondly, I'm sorry for what people who look like me have done to people who look like you. even though you may not have the courage or conviction to identify with the sins of your fathers. That statement there is as true can be. And you'll practice empathy in it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for what people who look like me have done to people who look like you. You would be hard pressed to find a black man or woman that wouldn't sit there and have tears well up in their eyes and say, at least they're trying to get it.
Yeah.
At least they're trying to get it. So that's the way a white person can begin a conversation with a black person that at least can get on the on-ramp of being productive.
That's great. I want to just ask, what is your hope? In light of all of this, in light of what's going on, there's a lot of people that are stressed. There's a lot of people that are tired and weary. The African-American brothers and sisters in our own church, as we've talked with, the word that came back over and over again was they feel weary, they feel tired, they feel stuck a little bit sometimes in between two worlds or sometimes three worlds. I think there's a weariness not just from this conversation, but on the backdrop of the COVID-19 epidemic and quarantine and economic uncertainty that adds to this as well. And so there is no quick solution. I know that, but where do you men as leaders, as godly men who are leading your congregation and following Jesus, where are you finding hope right now? And what is your hope moving forward?
Why don't I go forward, Pastor Brett? I'd love for you to finish this off, kind of get the final word.
Okay. Well, I was going to let you talk first, but I'll go ahead. Listen,
I would love for you to have the final word. So I'm going to be in heaven for forever. I'm going to be with Jesus forever because two men believed in inconvenient reconciliation. Forever. My hope is that it's going to keep happening. And for as much as culture is beginning to fall out of favor with the church and not like the church for all kinds of reasons, that this is just the undeniable reality that is at the center of every letter of the New Testament. Reconciliation of ethnicities and cultures. It's all the book of Romans is about. Mm-hmm. Galatians is about. Jews and Gentiles, if you guys can get along, you realize that you're a sign to the world that Jesus is healing his global family. So my hope is the church, the messiest, hardest thing I've ever been a part of, but this beautiful thing that Jesus is stubbornly holding to. And my hope is the church is just going to shine brighter and brighter in the coming days and years if we will pick up our cross and joyfully consider this amazing burden. I'm so tired, and I don't throw that out because I don't think it compares to someone like Pastor Brett or others, but it's such a joyful burden. I'm so happy to expend my energy into this. And I think that is the good news. This is literally what the church is made for. Mm. So that's my hope.
Pastor Brett.
It's beautiful. I've got tremendous hope. First of all, because I'm sandwiched in between two white guys today who love their church so much, love the kingdom so much, love their nation so much, that they are willing to risk an unscripted moment with a black man in this environment in their church. You're brave. You're brave. But you're brave because you love. And I am privileged to walk with a whole lot of people who look like you. And I mean that. It has not been easy. I would have preferred to have a whole lot of different looking people to walk with. Believe me, that was my preference. But God didn't send me to those folk. He didn't place me in that family. You put me here in every nation. And may I say that I don't know a group in America, secular or Christian, that is better built to handle this. I don't know of one. Every Black pastor I know in our movement is being tapped, knocked on the shoulder, called, emailed, texted. I am. Can you help me, please? And they're coming to that new environment out of health, not bitterness, with truth. Astounding. And most of the churches that I've had to help have been those that are outside of our movement, not in our movement. And so I'm grateful that I've got brothers who are of European descent. They really love me, and I love them. And we've got a two-way street that allows for conversation to go, and that without stop or yield signs. We just talk. And we offend one another. I can't tell you how offended I have been from time to time. And how offended I have made others. I have said stuff that's just dumb. But we haven't left one another because of the offense.
Yeah.
And so I've got great hope, because if God can do it with us, he can do it with anybody. Anybody. There's nothing special about our version of Adam. And as I stop, most of these protests are filled with white people. I never thought I would live and fault me for having small faith and little expectations. I never thought I'd see the day when en masse white people would like me and try to defend me. I had friends that would, but not just the average dude that lived down the street. Wow.
Yeah.
And what's different about this death than all the other deaths? Many of them were very similar. People were murdered on camera. And this one here has done something.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced at some level that is as a result of people like me who were birthed in a civil rights movement. I was born in 1960. And were taught by our parents, love people. I don't care what they call you. I don't care how they treat you. Forgive them, love them. Love them. This world is not going to treat you nice. Brett, you're going to have to speak twice as well just to be heard by white folk. So do not bring Ebonics home. That's what my mother said. She was an English teacher. She would not let me bring Ebonics home. I wanted to so bad. She almost slapped me. Said, listen to me. You have to speak twice as well just to be heard. She knew the world I was entering, but she never let me become bitter because I had to conform or become bicultural and understand what it meant to live in the white world as well as my African-American heritage. People like me have grown up. There are pastors all over. They're pastoring multi-ethnic churches like me. And there are pastors, white pastors who are pastoring multi-ethnic churches. There's been a massaging of the spiritual environment for almost 4 decades. Going against this devil. All of us praying, believing, standing, Lord, deal with it. We didn't know how it was going to happen. We didn't realize it was going to happen first in the world and then with a Lord, deal with it, deal with it, deal with it. And all of a sudden, we're seeing an answer to prayer. That white folks are becoming sensitive to our plight for the first time in history. For the first time in 400 years, since before the founding of the country, just the settlers coming, white people have their ears, they're listening. Nothing's being said that hasn't been said for 400 years. Yet now their ears are open. We're saying, oh, wow. So I have great hope that because God has heard my prayers and the prayers of people around me and the prayers that my ancestors prayed long ago, he is now, like in the book of Revelation, taking all those prayers in that bowl pouring them out. And answers are beginning to come. Sprouts in the ground that has been fallow are coming up. And so I believe that we are on the verge of something even bigger than just ethnic reconciliation. I think we're on the verge of an awakening and a revival. So
Amen.
I've got great hope because of people like you two guys. Proud to walk with you.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Brett. Thank you, Seth. You guys, I think, really helped us today. And grateful and hopeful for what God's going to do. I receive it. Thank you guys so much.